Hello everyone. This video will be covering Chapter 3 of our textbook, Practice Skills for Working with Groups. The objectives of this chapter is to articulate the benefits and function of treatment and task groups, attend to professional roles in groups, utilize theoretical frameworks in group assessments, intervention, and evaluations, select appropriate problem-solving and decision-making approaches with groups, and use of empathy and other interpersonal skills when working with groups. There are many types of benefits and functions of groups. Specific groups that you can consider are treatment and task groups. But we're going to talk about what the benefits overall is of group work. Group work is very beneficial to clients because it offers mutual assistance. The client can receive from other members of can receive support and assistance or education from other members of the group, but they also can provide education and support to other people in the group. Groups serve as another way that clients can connect with other people. Oftentimes, clients have different dynamics with family members or communities, and sometimes they feel isolated, and oftentimes they only can get that support from other people that they're looking for from a group dynamic. Groups are also helpful because they allow a safe place and supportive place to test new behaviors that they learn that they're learning, or trying to get rid of behaviors that are not conducive or beneficial to their overall well-being. And so it really helps enhance interpersonal skills and allows them to practice. Also, groups can help keep clients on task and accountable to achieving their personal, individual goals as well as the goals of the group. Also, the group helps in decision making because clients can get different and varied viewpoints from other members in the group. When thinking of the different types of groups, task group is one larger category of groups. Um, Examples of task groups include board of directors, task forces, committees and commissions, legislative bodies, and staff meetings. Most task groups are convened or gathered to achieve a specific set of objective or task or purposes, usually based on what the objectives and task is of the group will determine how that group is comprised and who are the members of that group. Um, Board of Directors is considered an administrative group charged with responsibility for setting the policy governing agency programs. Usually, the board is responsible for supervising the agency director as well as helping set policy for the overall group, organization, or program. Members of the board are not usually experts in the operation of the agency, but usually are selected for a specific reason. A lot of board of directors usually have to make some type of commitment to the group or the organization in which it is a part of. That can be time. Usually, board of directors have regularly quarterly board of directors meeting to talk about the overall operations of the program, and also they vote on certain bylaws or policies related to or changes or programs that are to be added to the program or the organization. Usually, board of directors are also responsible for doing some type of fundraising or donating a percentage or a certain dollar amount to the organization. And if they're not directly contributing to it, they are also responsible for some kind of financial support of the organization, even if it's in just flying to different states or participating in annual conferences that the organization may be having. But there's usually some type of financial component when somebody is appointed to a board of directors. I currently sit on two board of directors. One is for the National Association of Perinatal Social Workers, NAPSW. And actually, I'm considered an executive officer because I'm the former president of that organization. Another organization that I sit on the board for is the National Perinatal Association. All these appointed positions had to be voted on. You had to run for election to the board, and your usually the members of the organizations will vote, and through unanimous vote, the people who will serve on the board is selected, as well as the executive officers. I can tell you that as a member of the board, we do meet quarterly in the form of teleconferences for National Association of Perinatal Social Workers. We do that to be mindful of the cost of traveling. We meet once a year in person for our board meeting right before our annual conference. In a more different setup through National Perinatal Association, the board of directors are expected to meet in person for every board meeting, and it's quarterly. The most recent one was actually last week, and it was in Denver, Colorado. 2 days, hotel accommodations you have to usually pay out of pocket. Flight you have to pay out of pocket, and then you usually talk amongst other board members for about 2 days to talk about organization and any initiatives that the program is working on. Um, Usually there's terms set for board of directors. It varies based on the organization, but most of the roles that I served as board of directors, they were 2-year terms, and there's usually some kind of bylaw set on how many times you can run for the board. It's standard to have at least 2 terms, so usually any individual member can run for board twice, and that means they would be able to have on a maximum basis 2-year terms, 2 terms, about 4 years total. And again, this can range and this can be very different based on the organization that you choose to become a board of directors on. Board of directors is usually a very good opportunity. Most board of directors or organizations have some form of a student representative, not all. But if you do get a chance to serve as a board of director, it is a very wonderful leadership opportunity. And it always looks good on your resume to show your employer that you can serve at a leadership capacity for an organization. It also speaks a lot when you are selected from a group of your peers to participate to lead that program. Task force are usually groups established for a special purpose, and it usually stops at the completion of that task. So it's usually a set time frame usually given to establish a task force. I've oftentimes seen task force used when more work needs to be done in a specific area of a project, but the whole group may not all have the time to invest or may not have the specific expertise to address a certain area. And so then a larger group can form usually a smaller task force to address specifically a specific issue um, that may be uh, grappling or causing problems with the organization. So a task force can be a set up, task centered initiative, usually by specific people who will join that specific task force depending on what the need of the task is. Um, and it's also usually people who have additional time to dedicate to that particular task, or again have an expertise in that task. And again, usually it's an extension of a project with a more defined focus in that task, or sometimes it can be a created task force where it's not an extension of another project, but still an area of need where a group of people need to do and focus more on that particular task at hand. Committees are often groups responsible for dealing with specific tasks or matters as well. They may be formed by people in virtually any agency or organization. Usually committees tend to be larger than task force, but not necessarily. It depends on the makeup of the committee. A standing committee is one that exists on a continuous basis. It may be provided in an organization's bylaws. Ad hoc committees, like task force, is set up for one purpose and expected to cease operation after that purpose or task is completed. I can give you some examples of some standing committees based on the board of directors I've been involved with. For the National Association of Perinatal Social Workers, we have a communications committee, which is responsible for our quarterly distribution of our newsletter. This is getting people in the organization to submit articles, editing those articles, and making sure they're disseminated on our website and to our members. Another example of a committee would be our advocacy or social justice committee. That branch of the organization is usually responsible for understanding and knowing what are some of the policies and legislative priorities that are going on within each state and making sure they distribute that education out to our members. And sometimes that's encouraging members to get behind a particular political issue that may be of specific interests of perinatal social workers or the clients or the patients that we serve. Another committee that we have is a social action, social networking committee, and they do our national networking. This is our Facebook, our Instagram, all the different social media outlets to get the word out about our organizations, things that we're doing, recruitment efforts, and our conferences, for example. Give you an example of other type of committees that we have. We have a finance committee that helps create an overview, goes over our budgets. We have education committee as well. Um, those are pretty much the key. Oh, membership committee, and they're charged with keeping an eye on our membership, making sure they do recruitment and retention efforts. Again, those are examples of standing committees within an organization. Also want to take the time out to talk about another type of committee. These are sometimes appointed by members of Congress or legislative officials, and it's usually addressing a glaring issue or need within a given region. Give you an example of that. The District of Columbia just recently created its MMRC, Maternal Mortality Review Committee. I am a member, and I was appointed by Mayor Bowser to be a part of this committee. And what this committee is charged with doing is reviewing all maternal deaths in the District of Columbia, and seeing if there's anything that could have been done to prevent that death and make recommendations to help improve the death rate for mothers, particularly women of color in the DC area. So eventually we will develop a standards of practice, and then release and disseminate a report based on our findings and provide hopefully a good rationale on why mothers are dying in the District of Columbia area from a perinatal standpoint, and more importantly, some recommendations on how to prove these outcomes. But that's another example of a committee, but you probably have heard of a lot more. But for that particular committee, you have to be vetted. They were specifically looking for experts in perinatal healthcare, and they was specifically made up of certain people. They wanted they wanted a couple nurses, they wanted a couple midwives, they wanted physicians, they wanted one social worker, they wanted a family member of a woman who passed away or who was affected by maternal mortality or loss, to sit on the board as well. So it's a pretty decent sized group, but we're charged with a specific task. And again, it's considered a work group, and hopefully it'll improve outcomes. But if you do get a chance to ever serve on the committee, it's an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary committee. So something very interesting to partake in. If you get an opportunity to do that, please do. Legislative bodies include city councils, county boards of supervisors, or state legislator in the U.S. Congress. They're usually composed of state legislator and usually have a legal responsibility for establishing laws or perhaps appropriating funds for programs to establish laws. Staff meetings are usually routine organizational meetings that serve the purpose of um, keeping employees, staff members in the loop in terms of policies, reviews, policy changes. Staff meetings are also used to improve communications amongst a group of individuals within an organization. Also, staff meetings are often meant to build a sense of community within an organization. Staff meetings are usually very structured. They start off with an agenda to make sure that everything is covered. They're usually routine. They can be weekly, monthly, quarterly, but they are to occur usually regularly to keep staff abreast of things that are going on within a group or an organization. Usually there's somebody, a minute taker at these staff meetings as well as board of directors meetings where somebody's recording the minutes and keeping track of what was said, what things were voted on or discussed within a particular staff meeting. Multidisciplinary teams or M teams are a group of professionals from various disciplines that meet to discuss specific clients with whom team members are working with. Um, so perhaps for a mental health agency or an agency that provides wraparound services for children, they may have multidisciplinary teams. One would be the psychiatrist would usually be part of that team, and they will be discussing what medications the client is on, how that medication should be improving symptoms, what are some of the side effects that may occur with that particular medication. Another person that might be part of a wraparound team would be a behavioral specialist. That person is usually responsible for writing the treatment plan, the behavioral modification plans for that particular child in wraparound services, and meeting with the TSS worker, the therapeutic staff support person who's actually carrying out or executing the treatment plan of behavioral modification, usually in the child's home or at a school setting. But that would be an example of a multidisciplinary team working together for a client's benefit. And they would want to meet at least once a month or however stated by agency policy, just to make sure they're coordinating care and communicating across disciplines about the needs of that um, client. And so the therapeutic staff support person who's actually working with that particular child for about maybe 10 to 20 hours a week can talk to the psychiatrist about prescribed medications, any side effects that they're seeing that may not be helping. And then the TSS worker can also let that psychiatrist know if the medication being prescribed is actually targeting the symptoms that they're expecting. And then the psychiatrist can modify that particular medication or decide to change that medication to improve outcomes for that particular client. And that's an example of a multidisciplinary team meeting for specific purposes. Hospitals also employ multidisciplinary teams. Sometimes they have case conferences. Sometimes they do what they call clinical rounds, which is basically a multidisciplinary team meeting to talk over the plan of care for that particular patient, and then all disciplines usually chime in on what they're doing with the patient so that everyone can understand what everyone's role is and how that patient is being helped. It also helps in reducing duplication of services that can occur when many disciplines or many workers are working with a particular client. Case conferences and staffing. Case conferences usually occur with the family or the client and the client's family. Usually, this is just to review interventions, review progress, maybe update the assessments, touch base with clients, make sure they're satisfied with services that they're receiving. Or sometimes if there's a change, whether it's a change in the workers, a change in the agency policy, that will impact that particular client or that client system. Case conferences are helpful with that. Case conferences can also occur with people working closely to the case or with the client, but not have the client involved. Usually that's done for quality improvement initiatives where you may have, for instance, the same TSS worker, behavioral specialist, and psychiatrist. They may be working together to make sure that um, they are not duplicating services for a client. They want to make sure they review the work that each one have been doing with that particular client individually to decide if standard of care is being followed, or maybe if there's more that can be done for the client and the team feels as though the client is not progressing in the way that they had hoped. Sometimes they may schedule a case conference to decide if more needs to be done, if more enhanced services need to be added, or if that particular client needs to be transferred to another agency for more services. Social action groups, as their name implies, usually are created after an assessment has determined some kind of social welfare or economic policies that are hurting or impeding an ability of a person to receive necessary or needed services or in-kind assistance. So social action groups are really focused on making sure that they address a need or a concern that is going on with a particular client or a client group. The goal is usually to change some aspect of the environment, and that can include social policies or physical conditions in an environment or any other condition that is considered unjust, unfair, or undesirable for a client. Other type of groups are participatory action groups and achieving organizational goals. You can read more in detail about those groups on your own. But participatory action research groups are usually developed to develop data that could be used to bring about change in a government program. Um, Usually, its goal is to, again, utilize research to improve outcomes and use really data to help drive how to improve the quality or the reach or the offerings of programs that are already established. Other type of groups, treatment groups. When you're thinking about treatment groups, the type of groups that fall under treatment groups include growth groups, therapy groups, educational groups, socialization groups, self-help groups, support groups, and social networking groups. When you're thinking about treatment groups, think about this broad category of groups and how they can help a client. Growth groups are usually designed to encourage and support the growth of an individual group member. Usually, the belief is that other people in the group can help provide insight to that member and help them improve their understanding of themselves. Usually, those groups participate in various activities to help foster and set the foundation for optimal growth within its members. Therapy groups usually help clients who have an identified goal of changing some aspect of their behavior or their therapy. And usually that's done in a very purposeful, structured environment that is really meant to reduce usually symptoms or improve behaviors for that particular member or members within the group. And that group dynamic is used to help reduce symptoms or help clients manage their symptoms and or behaviors better. Educational groups also are a variety of different groups for educational purposes. But usually the members in that group share information about themselves or others. Usually education can take place in didactic presentations, or it can occur through role-playing activities, or sometimes even just supportive um, discussions in a safe environment. There are different type of educational groups. And it's also not uncommon that certain elements or certain factors in groups show in other groups. So it's no reason why a therapy group can also be educational, nor an educational group have some components of therapy in it. So these are not mutually exclusive dynamics that occur in these groups. But usually the way these groups are set up, they usually have a specific goal. And for the education group, it's to make sure members walk away having more information and or more knowledge than they had when they started the group. Socialization groups um, assist participants in acquiring the skills that they need to become socialized into the community. And there's usually a presumption here that the group members have a deficit of some sort or some social skills. This can be somebody who may need, think about anger management, where they're put in a group with others to help them manage and improve their ability to socialize with others without losing their temper. Another socialization type group may be for returning citizens to acclimate them before they return back home to their communities, especially after being in isolation or locked up for a period of time. It's not uncommon for service members also to need some type of socialization groups when they transition from military life back to citizen uh, living situations. Um, and there's more and more different types, but usually, again, there's some kind of interpersonal or socialization issue with that particular member, and they're usually put it in a group with other people who need to work on the same issue. And so, hopefully, the goal of the group will be to improve those skills so that they have better or improved socialization skills. Also, communication groups to help people improve the way they communicate, to be more effective communicators, are also considered socialization groups. Self-help groups have been around for a very, very long time, and they're very effective for those participants who agree to those type of services. They're usually led by members who share the problems experienced by other people in the group. It is also not uncommon for a professional to play a role in the self-help group, advising, consulting, or serving as a leader or co-leader for such group. Give you an example of these groups: AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, or NA, Narcotics Anonymous, are examples of these type of self-help groups. Support groups are groups of sharing certain characteristics, group of people sharing certain characteristics who get together to provide one another with emotional sustenance or encourage new coping mechanisms and allow a strengths-based sharing of issues, concerns, and problems. When I was working as a medical social worker in a hospital, support groups became very, very, very important, and each particular unit within the hospital started developing their support group. I worked in a newborn intensive care nursery for 15 years, and one of the groups that we started was called a peer support group, where we trained former mothers who had babies in the newborn intensive care to come back to offer peer support to other mothers who currently had babies in the newborn intensive care nursery. We called this group Coffee Hour, and we were encouraging mothers to remove themselves or leave the stressful NICU environment in a conference room that was close and nearby to their infant so they weren't too far away. And they can use that time either as a respite out of the NICU, but also talk to somebody who had went through the same experience and offer hope and encouragement to that particular mother who is currently dealing with that stressful situation of an infant being in the intensive care nursery. Now, our peer support group also had an educational component to it in that we trained the mothers on the peer support leaders to help refer or provide information to those mothers about where to go when their needs weren't being met. So, for instance, if a particular mother had issues with insurance or issues with hospital bills, they were usually referred to billing or case management, and usually that peer support person had the resources and the contact numbers within the hospital for that particular mother to call. If a mother was having problems getting to the hospital, visiting with their infant, was really stressed out, more than normal about the situation, and really needed to talk to somebody, the peer support groups will refer them to social work services. If the family or the mother was visiting the peer support group and stated that she needed more spiritual support, those mothers, the peer support leaders referred those mothers to pastoral care for assistance with those needs. So in that aspect, it also served as an educational group. Our peer support group also served as a therapy group because we would do quick surveys of mother stress when they came to the group and mother stress when they left the group. And usually mothers would say that their stress had been reduced within that hour session. And they also felt relieved and comforted and supported and felt more hopeful now that they had talked to somebody that had went through the same journey that they had and made it and was successful in terms of outcome. The other thing I want to say that the group was the peer support group that we had in the hospital. It was also a support group in terms of socialization. In short, mothers were allowed to socialize with each other and talk to each other. And sometimes being in the hospital setting can be very isolating and alone, especially when you start, deal with the stress and all the feelings associated with having a sick child. So the coffee hour piece, we usually have some refreshments, light refreshments there for the mothers. They can also just socialize with other mothers in the unit that they may not normally have a chance to talk to. And another category of group is social networking group, which are usually some sort of computer mediated communication that has a major impact on various kinds of working group. You may see these pop up a lot. Facebook tends to have a lot of social networking groups, and sometimes organizations may have their own listservs or websites that serve as a social networking group. Um, the benefits of this is that a lot of people can get this needed support and assistance that they need from the comforts of their own home. Very convenient, easily accessible. Anytime they need it, they can log on and join a community, share information, share support, and so forth. However, one of the concerns of the social networking group is that you really are not controlling who's coming into the group, and this really can be chaotic. Also, the energy of certain members in the group, they may take advantage of that. And so, usually, there's somebody in charge of the social networking group that has privileges to add and remove members from that group for a particular reason. But again, it could be very helpful. But I usually caution my clients when they use social networking groups, they really want to make sure that they're affiliated with a reputable organization or program to get the best in terms of support that they need. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the professional roles that social workers can have in groups. And they're similar to some of the roles that you remember from individual work. One is a broker, which help group members obtain needed resources. This can be referrals. This can also be a key aspect for education groups and therapy groups and support groups, making sure that you help support members not just in real time, but making sure they have resources to help them when they're not in the group as well. Another professional social work role, a generalist social work role, will be a mediator, which helps group members resolve conflicts or other dissension. And usually, social workers, when they serve as a mediator role, they use all the skills of interviewing to be able to do that. Sometimes it's listening in order to mediate. Sometimes it's paraphrasing, summarizing, restating in order to mediate. Sometimes it's reframing and or confronting an issue or a challenge, providing clarity and insight. All those are tools that social workers use to help mediate problems within a group. Um, Educator is key. Sometimes in a therapy group, sometimes the social workers need to really do a lot of education on what does it mean to have depression and what are the many forms that that can look like within an individual. Provide them maybe what the formal diagnosis is and what are the accompanying symptoms for that disorder as an example of how a social worker can be an educator. Maybe a social worker can be an educator to all the resources that are available within an organization or in a community. Sometimes social workers are educating clients on policies, existing policies, and upcoming policy changes. Another role that the generalist social worker may have in a group would be a facilitator. And this role usually is pretty much leading as well as really moderating the entire process from the beginning to the end. Um, it's usually the role of leader, but not always. Even though a social worker may be the official leader of the group, they may utilize their role or their power as leader to shift to other leaders in the group, especially when they want to work on certain skills within a particular member. Sometimes the social worker may allow each member of that group to serve as a leader in any given session, but it's still a form of facilitating or moderating the group session, and also being attention to verbal as well as nonverbal communication that may occur within that group. And so now I'm going to talk to you briefly about some theoretical frameworks for group assessment, intervention, and evaluation. One is group development. There are stages of group development or stages or phases of group that are very important. And all of it really helps determine what the culture is of the group, norms as well as power. And I'm going to talk a little bit more now. Most groups have an appointed leader. Sometimes it's an ongoing leader throughout the entire group. Or as I stated earlier, that leader can appoint other people to be leaders at any given time in the group. Usually the leader provides direction, right? Um, and usually the group relies very heavily on that group leader, especially in the beginning stage of that group. Um, Usually in the beginning of a group process, the culture has not developed yet, and uh, members can be hesitant to engage. So usually in the beginning phase of the group, you're trying to understand what the culture is, what the rules are, what the norms will be in the group, and usually the leader's job, which is usually more heavier in the beginning of group because they're setting the tone, is to make the group members or help the group members become comfortable in the group setting and the environment, and set up and discuss the rules of the group and how the group will carry on their purpose or goal. In the second stage of group, there may be some conflict that occurs as members tend to feel a little bit more safer in a group. Members may be more vocal and may assert their autonomy more, their individual self, rather than acclimate to the group identity. Um, they may express their feelings about the group and the process and the individuals in it more often in the second phase or stage or group. And then also is categorized by sometimes some tension as well as some uncomfortable feelings for members. And that is okay and that is expected transition into the second phase of group. It is usually also expected as a norm for the group because we know that many of the members are getting comfortable and also still acclimating to the change in atmosphere. Also, as the individual members start to get to know each other and work with one another and communicate with one another, they may find that certain personalities in a group conflict with one another, and this may cause tension. They may uh, challenge the power and authority of the leader during this time. They may try to assume some more power or over the leader or other group members during this time as their personality starts to really become more evident and they're more vocal about certain things, so you get to understand the members a lot better. Also, during the second phase, now that they're settling into the group, they are starting to work on whatever issues or goals that they're there to help, that the group is meant to help achieve. And whenever somebody is actually going through the work of change, whether it's trying to change their interpersonal behaviors or their symptoms, that's usually a time of strain and stress for that particular member. And it's not uncommon for them to either express this or potentially project that stress onto other members of the group as well. And so this third stage of group is considered the working phase of the group. Members usually frequently feel positive about the group. They at that point have developed some affection or liking for some of the members, but they also may dislike some of the members at this point as well. Usually there's some sense of trust in the safety of the group and the group dynamic. Um, the roles of the individual members of the group will start becoming more clear as the culture develops, meaning the one who tends to be the black sheep, the one who tend to be the most talkative in the group, the one that tends to be the most positive, the person in the group that tends to be the most negative. All these things start to show itself in the working phase of the group. And so the fourth stage of the group is considered separation. And this is usually when the group has reached its goals and the members begin to separate emotionally from the group. In this stage, there are some feelings of loss when the group ends. There may also be sadness or anger, resentment about the loss of the group. And so just to review that again, the first stage of development for the group, the first or the initial stage of group, there's usually a strong reliance on the leader. When you're thinking about the second stage of group, that's the level where there's a lot of conflict and tension. The third phase of group is the working phase, and the fourth stage of group will be the separation phase. Those stages of development for group is what we consider the group developmental stages. Again, another area you want to look at is the group culture, norms, and powers within the group. Norms are usually the unwritten expectations about how individuals will act in certain situations. Norms are part of the culture of all groups and can be a help or it can be a hindrance to that particular group. Think about the person who is always negative in the group and their negativity potentially being pervasive in that group. And hopefully, there will be a skilled leader who understands that culture and group norm and then utilize other members in the group to help balance out that negativity with hopefully some reaffirmation or positive statements. Culture is very important in a group because usually you'll start seeing the individual members' beliefs and values within that group, what traditions they may hold or customs within that culture, that group culture. Some of these values and beliefs will be shared amongst members. Some of them will not be shared amongst members, and this can potentially cause conflict. When you think about that group culture, it'll determine whether how people react to one another and interact with each other as well as interact with the leader. So in that aspect, group culture is very important, and it's usually the facilitator's role or the leader's role in that group to help cultivate that culture and also recognize those norms and understand any power dynamics within the group, including the power that they bring. Sometimes members may not feel comfortable talking, sharing, or contributing because of that power dynamic. And in that aspect, the facilitator needs to take a back seat and make sure they're aware that even though that the power is shifted, that they empower the individuals in the group to take some ownership of the group itself and the group dynamic or the culture. Group size and composition is very important. And again, it depends on the purpose of the group. If you go back, there are many different groups. There are peer support groups, there are self-help groups, therapy groups. Based on the task groups, committees, based on the nature or purpose of that group will most likely dictate what the size and the composition is. There are a lot of theories on what's best in terms of numbers. Most theories believe 5 to 6 in a group is enough when it comes to therapy groups or certain type of groups. But there have been groups that have been very successfully ran with a lot larger size. So it's not written in stone, but usually some people feel like having smaller groups are usually more easier. They're definitely a little bit more easier for the facilitator because sometimes it could be more easier to manage um, the individual participants and the varying personalities that can exist. The more they are, the more it is for the facilitator and leader to manage and keep on task. But again, for those who are very seasoned, they can do this with smaller groups and or larger groups. When you're thinking about composition, this can be gender, this can be age, this can be about issues, race, culture, spirituality. Do you want it to be only children? Do you want it to be only adults? Do you want it to be only women? Or do you want them to be only men? If it's a group for substance use, do you want current active substance users, former substance users? If they're former substance users, do you want them 6 months clean? Do you want them 1 year clean in order to join the group? No clean time to join the group? And the key here is you have to understand that as the facilitator or the person who's developing the group size and the composition will directly impact the culture of the group, the norms of the group, and any power dynamic. So when you're thinking about how do you want to construct your group, you want to also realize how the composition of the group may impact that group culture and be prepared for it. Also, the duration of the group. One of the social work skills that we talked about in this course is making sure when you talk to clients, you work with them, but you also want to prepare them for what generalist social work practice and your work with them will be. We have an ethical duty to explain to them what the role of social workers are, what our role in the agency is, and how we can help them service. But we also have to let them know the length of time and the duration to expect services from us as well. It's the same in a group process. If it's going to be a monthly group that meets 1 hour in the evening time for 6 months, that needs to be informed to the group members from the beginning. And the same reason for termination purpose, they are ready, they are prepared, and they know it's coming. They still will have the sense of sadness and sometimes anger at the end of the group, but it's still our duty to make sure we let the group members know what the duration is, and we must stick to that in our structure of the group. A few more points I'm going to add about social work or generalist social work practice in groups is decision making process in groups. Just like the duration of the group needs to be set at the very beginning and communicated to all the participants, so does the decision making process or protocol. One way you can think about, there are different ways you can go about decision making within a group. One can be consensus decision making, which is usually the preferred for many groups, because it's when all members are when it's concluded that all members will accept and support the decision, even if they were not initially so inclined. So we will want, as a group facilitator, group leader, you want to make sure that you've established an environment, or that you work on establishing an environment of openness and safety and communication. but it's where the group will agree that they will abide by the final decision made by the group. They will accept it as well as support it, even though they may not have voted for a particular a decision or a course of action within that group. Um, Compromise. Most of us have also been involved where you had to um, be part of a decision through compromise. In these situations, you're thinking about, if possible, if you have maybe half the group wanting to take one course of action, and you may have another set of group members wanting to execute another course of action, seeing if you could take elements from both of their plan of actions to come up with some kind of compromise on the best decision or best course of action for the group. Um, you want to try to come up with some kind of middle ground that all members can support at least part of the decision. Ultimately, they're going to have to agree to the whole thing, but at least you're going to show them how everyone's input was included, hopefully, in that final outcome. And that's how you would come up with or develop a group compromise. Another model or way of dealing with decision making is just majority rule, which most groups find that to be sometimes the most easiest in terms of easy to take the vote, have the decision, and move forward. But usually, um, compromise and consensus is the way to go, even though it's a little bit more work to do for the facilitators. At least it helps each particular group member get more buy-in when they know that they've contributed something to the final decision. Another aspect I wanted to talk about, which I think is a very unique and strong strength-based feature of a group, is brainstorming. And this is a technique that we can use as group leaders, and we usually use this to have the group express different viewpoints about a topic, an issue, and so forth. And the reason why this is a strength is because this is a strength-based technique is that it uses the collective of the group um, to help come up with different options and different ideas that maybe a particular client may not have been able to come up with that many options on their own. And even you as a social worker may not have been able to come up with all the different viewpoints like a group would. And so again, one of the most strongest attributes of a group is its ability to brainstorm and come up and generate ideas as a collective. This slide talks a little bit about the different decision-making strategies that you can use as a group facilitator or group leader. Again, consensus, decision-making, compromise, majority rule, rule by an individual, so forth. Conceptual frameworks, task roles, maintenance roles, non-functional roles. Please be sure to read more about this in your book. Um, this also talks about the different roles that can develop in your group. Potentially positive roles here on the left: elaborator, instructor, recorder, listener, encourager, compromiser. But also a list here some of the negative roles: aggressor, blocker, dominator, and also non-functional roles: scapegoat, defensive member, deviant member, quiet member, so forth and so forth. And this helps you understand your culture of your group by the roles that the members seem to be assuming within that group. Conflict resolution is a intervention skill that's very helpful as well as needed in task and treatment group. Usually, resolution involves recognizing a conflict as well as assessing it, and then choosing a strategy and intervening. Okay, um, it's not likely that you will ever engage in a group that doesn't have some area of conflict, but being able to assess it, understand it, recognize it when it's happening, and then use hopefully some of the decision-making model that we talked about, or decision-making strategies to help resolve that conflict will be helpful. Also, there are other type of tools or skills that you can use to help resolve conflict. As a coach, you can model appropriate behavior or model appropriate conflict resolution techniques. As the facilitator or leader, the social worker can coach members along so that to help them resolve the conflict on their own using problem-solving skills, team building. These can be activities to help improve communication and interaction among members. Confrontation, we talked about in other chapters. Maybe the social worker serving as a consultant to the group, or maybe having added people come into the group to serve it on a consulting basis to the group to help support each member's ability to resolve the conflict. Coordinating and using the structure of the group itself, the individual members within the group, in order to help resolve the conflict. And that will be the end of our chapter on group dynamics. Thank you.